Let me tell you exactly how those words came back to destroy her. Tuesday morning, I'm standing on my front porch, the one my great-grandmother built with her own hands in 1869, watching this woman tap her French manicured nails on my oak doorframe like she owns the place. Her name is Constance Fairweather, and she's the HOA president who just made the worst mistake of her life. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice level, "I've never joined your HOA. Not one signature, not one document." "You remember now, sweetie. The paperwork is official. You owe the money." This house was built in 1869. Her HOA incorporated in 1985. This is the home I inherited clean and clear, where I raised my family, where I lost my wife Sarah. Her linseed oil scent still clings to the trim she spent years restoring. Sometimes I run my fingers along the brass doorknob she polished smooth, just to feel that connection. Then the devil moved in next door. Meet Constance Fairweather. And yes, the irony of that name burns like acid. Picture a real estate Barbie, bleached blonde hair, designer suits that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, French manicures sharp enough to gut a fish. She drives a white BMW like she's leading a funeral procession for common decency. Constance bought the biggest house in Willowbrook Estates, the subdivision that sprouted around us in the 80s like suburban cancer, and immediately got herself elected HOA president. Within 6 months, she'd transformed a sleepy neighborhood group into her personal shakedown operation. Her specialty? Terrorizing old folks. Here's her playbook. Find elderly homeowners with valuable properties. Create bogus violations for grass too long or mailboxes the wrong color. Pile on fees and legal costs until they can't afford lawyers. Force quick sales to her real estate company at basement prices. Rinse, repeat, get rich. She'd already squeezed out Martha Gonzalez, sweet 67-year-old whose only crime was planting roses without architectural approval. Then Robert Bellamy, 71, got hit with $8,000 in drainage violations for a puddle that formed after heavy rain. Both sold their family homes to Constance's company for 60 cents on the dollar. But my house? My great-grandmother's 1869 deed explicitly states we are forever free from association liens or fees, legal language carved in stone long before Constance was even a nightmare in her mother's womb. Constance Fairweather isn't reasonable. The attack came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was sipping coffee on my front porch, listening to these 155-year-old boards creak their morning song, when her white BMW pulled into my driveway like an invasion force. "Mr. Blackwood," she announced, stepping out in heels that clicked against my gravel like a death march, "we need to discuss your numerous property violations." I almost laughed. "Violations? Lady, I maintain this place better than most folks half my age." She whipped out a clipboard thick with official-looking papers. "Unapproved exterior paint color. Garden exceeding permitted boundaries. Non-compliant mailbox design. Failure to submit architectural modification requests." The morning dew on Sarah's memorial roses caught the sunlight like tiny diamonds as I tried to process this insanity. "Ma'am, I've never been part of your HOA, never signed one document, never paid dues, never even knew your organization existed." Constance's smile could have curdled milk. "Property records show this address is now within Willowbrook Estates boundaries. Your grandmother signed the neighborhood agreement in 1982. She handed me a document with what looked like Grandma's signature. But the paper felt wrong, too crisp, too white, like it came off a printer 5 minutes ago instead of 40 years back. "This is impossible," I said, my electrician's training kicking in. "Grandma died in January 1983. She couldn't sign something dated December 1982 for an HOA that didn't incorporate until 1985. But Constance was already clicking back to her BMW. Mission accomplished. 30 days to comply and pay outstanding fees of $12,000, she called over her shoulder. After that, we file a lien and begin foreclosure proceedings. As her taillights disappeared, I stood there holding forged paperwork that could steal my family's legacy. The century-old house seemed to shudder with rage. Within a week, Constance launched her documentation blitzkrieg. I came home from the hardware store to find another certified letter waiting, thick as a phone book. Inside were neighborhood incorporation documents from 1982, complete with what looked like Grandma's signature on 3 pages. But here's the thing about being an electrician for 30 years. You develop an eye for forgeries. These papers had crisp, laser-printed text that didn't exist in 1982. The aged yellowing looked like someone dunked them in coffee that morning. And Grandma's signature? By 1980, her arthritis had her handwriting shaky as a paint mixer, but this signature was smooth as silk. Wrong move, Constance. You just picked a fight with someone who notices when the hot wire's the wrong gauge.
The next morning, I headed to the county courthouse, a limestone building that smells like dust, old leather, and a century of legal battles. The clerk, Betty Morrison, remembered my grandmother from church socials. "Ezra, honey," she whispered, glancing around like we were planning a bank heist. "That HOA incorporation you're asking about, filed March 15th, 1985, 3 whole years after your grandma passed. No way she signed anything for them." But Betty had more surprises. Those original 1869 property boundaries she helped me trace, they extended 20 feet into what Constance now called HOA Common Area. The fancy gazebo where she held her little power meetings sat squarely on my family's land. The musty smell of century-old surveyor maps mixed with my growing satisfaction. Not only was I never in her HOA, she'd built her kingdom on stolen ground. Armed with certified copies, I marched into Constance's emergency violation hearing Thursday night. She'd scheduled it for 7 p.m., packed the room with her cronies, and arranged folding chairs like a kangaroo court with herself as judge and jury. The community center reeked of industrial carpet cleaner and barely suppressed hostility. 20 pairs of eyes tracked my entrance, while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps. "Mr. Blackwood," Constance announced, banging her gavel like she was calling an execution, "you're here to address multiple property violations and explain your refusal to pay lawful HOA assessments." I stood slowly, savoring the moment. "Actually, I'm here to inform everyone that your HOA incorporated in March 1985, making it physically impossible for my grandmother to sign documents dated December 1982, since she died in January 1983. Dead silence. Even the fluorescent buzzing seemed to quiet down. "Furthermore," I continued, watching panic flash across Constance's Botoxed face, "your clubhouse sits 20 feet onto my property, according to the original 1869 survey. You've been trespassing for decades." Constance's perfectly manicured fingers went white-knuckled on that gavel. "Those are serious allegations. Do you have proof?" I held up certified county records like a royal flush. Betty Morrison helped me pull the real documents. Everything's witnessed and sealed. That's when Brad Kowalski, Constance's head enforcer who looks like he bench presses Buicks for fun, jumped up screaming about troublemakers destroying property values. But while Brad was making noise, I noticed Constance frantically texting someone under the table. The sweat beading on her forehead told me everything I needed to know. She knew I was right. The meeting exploded into chaos. Neighbors who'd been nodding along with her violations suddenly looked confused. Whispered conversations broke out as people probably wondered what other facts were fabricated. Mrs. Henderson from down the street actually stood up and asked Constance point blank, "If his house predates the HOA, how can you charge him fees?" "Executive session," Constance shrieked, banging her gavel like a woodpecker on speed. "We need to discuss legal strategies." Translation, damage control meeting, all hands on deck. Walking home under streetlights that cast long shadows through Sarah's old oak trees, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. The evening air carried the scent of honeysuckle and the sweet smell of small-town justice. But Constance wasn't done. The next morning brought 5 new violation notices crammed in my mailbox like legal confetti. Unauthorized exterior modifications for porch railings installed in 1923. Non-compliant landscaping for Sarah's memorial roses. Improper storage for my tool shed. Noise violations for my lawnmower. And the crown jewel, failure to obtain permits for structural changes because I'd replaced 3 loose porch boards last summer. Each violation, $500 fine plus $200 administrative costs. The message couldn't be clearer. You embarrassed me in public, now I'm declaring war. I crumpled those notices and tossed them in my coffee can, where the metal made a satisfying clang against the sides. The sound reminded me of the first electrical junction box I'd ever wired, that click when everything connects just right. Game on, Constance. You have no idea what you just started.
Dawn harassment began. Constance's revenge campaign started at dawn the next day. I woke to the rumble of Brad Kowalski's diesel pickup idling outside my bedroom window at 6 a.m. sharp. Through the curtains, I watched him photograph my house from every angle, measuring my grass with a ruler like he was documenting evidence at a murder scene. The acrid smell of diesel exhaust drifted through my window screens as Brad made his rounds, photographing Sarah's bird feeder, her sunflower welcome mat, even the antique milk jug she'd turned into a planter. Every single day, same routine, same diesel truck announcing his arrival like a mechanical rooster from hell. By week 2, violation notices were flooding my mailbox like legal confetti. Grass exceeds 2.5-inch maximum by 1/4 inch. Bird feeder lacks architectural approval. Welcome mat, non-regulation color. Each one carrying $500 fines plus $200 administrative costs. But Constance's real genius revealed itself when I tried hiring a lawyer. "Sorry, Mr. Blackwood," said Jim Jenkins at Jenkins & Associates. "Conflict of interest. We're already representing the HOA on another matter." The pattern emerged. I tried the next attorney on Google. Same story. Then another. Turns out, Constance had systematically retained every affordable lawyer in 3 counties on preliminary consultations for various HOA issues. The woman had legally cornered me like a chess grandmaster. Standing in my kitchen that evening, surrounded by mounting violations and rejection letters, I felt trapped. The familiar creak of Sarah's favorite floorboard reminded me of her favorite saying, "Ezra, honey, when they stack the deck, deal your own cards." Time to get creative. I drove 2 counties over to find Martha Rodriguez, an HOA specialist whose office smelled like fresh coffee and righteous anger. "This is textbook harassment," she said, reviewing my case. "But fighting HOAs is expensive. $15,000 minimum, assuming they don't drag it out for years. My retirement account, $8,200. The math didn't work." But Martha dropped a bombshell. "I've seen Constance Fairweather's pattern before. 3 elderly homeowners in Riverside County, same tactics, all forced into quick sales to her real estate company at 40% below market value. The pieces clicked like a perfect electrical connection. This wasn't about compliance, it was organized theft." Building the case. I became a part-time private investigator, tracking Constance's white BMW around town. Tuesday morning, showing my house to buyers while I was at the store. Thursday, contractors measuring my lot for development potential. Bitter realization. She was already spending my inheritance. My breakthrough came from Dorothy Williams, the 74-year-old librarian who appeared at my door with cookies and conspiracy theories. Dorothy's whisper. "Ezra," she whispered, "I'm getting the same violation notices. Mailbox wrong color, garden borders improper. But I did some digging at the library." respect for her skills. Dorothy's research skills would shame the FBI. Spread across my kitchen table were printouts revealing that Brad Kowalski's brother owned the landscaping company getting all HOA contracts. Same family ran the towing service for parking violations. Even the independent property management company was a shell corporation. The smell of oatmeal cookies mixed with the stench of corruption as Dorothy revealed her masterstroke. "Here's the real kicker," she said, producing a manila folder. "I requested public records on all recent property sales in our area. Guess who bought 12 houses in the past 2 years, all from elderly owners facing sudden HOA emergencies? Cannon's Real Estate Company. Every single one purchased at 30 to 50% below market value." But Dorothy saved the best for last. A leaked document from someone inside the HOA office. Pre-filled purchase agreements for 16 properties, all owned by residents over 65, all facing manufactured compliance crises. My name topped the list with an offer of $180,000, 60 grand below assessed value. "It gets worse," Dorothy continued. "Look at the timing. The violations always started exactly 90 days before the purchase agreements were dated, like clockwork, like a machine designed to steal homes from people too old or poor to fight back." That's when Robert Bellamy knocked on my door. The 71-year-old retired engineer had been fighting his own violation war, $8,000 in fines for a drainage problem that mysteriously appeared after every rainstorm. "They hit Martha Gonzalez, too," he said, settling into Sarah's old kitchen chair. "Forced her to sell last month after they claimed her roses created a fire hazard." We spent that evening around my kitchen table, like generals planning a counterattack, the overhead light casting determined shadows across faces that had seen enough injustice for one lifetime. "Here's what I think," Robert said, his engineer's brain working overtime. "This is a criminal enterprise disguised as municipal authority. But they made one mistake." "What's that?" "The legal loophole," Robert smiled grimly. "They're not actually government, which means citizens' arrest laws apply if we can prove fraud." The old house settled around us with familiar nighttime creaks, and I felt 5 generations of Blackwood determination flowing through those walls. Constance thought she was hunting easy prey. She was about to learn what happens when the prey start hunting back. Constance escalated to legal warfare. The next week, her attack dog, Reginald Pickering, a skeletal lawyer who wore $1,000 suits like medieval armor, filed an emergency lawsuit demanding $18,000 in fines plus attorney fees. The real gut punch? They'd scheduled court for just 10 days out, claiming I posed imminent threat to community welfare. The process server who delivered the lawsuit looked genuinely apologetic as he handed me papers thick enough to stop a bullet. "Defendant has willfully defied lawful authority and threatens neighborhood property values through continued noncompliance." Their filing claimed they wanted my house placed under court-appointed receivership, essentially handing control to someone who'd bring the property into compliance, then sell it to recover their manufactured damages. Legal theft with a judge's blessing. But while Constance was sharpening her knives, Dorothy was building our nuclear weapon. The woman had spent 40 years mastering county records before becoming our librarian. She knew every database, every filing loophole, every bureaucratic weakness in the tri-state area. When Dorothy said she'd do some research, it was like watching a chess master plan 20 moves ahead. "Ezra," she called that afternoon, barely containing her excitement, "drop everything and get to the library. I've found something that'll burn their house down." At the library, Dorothy had transformed an entire table into mission control. Survey maps, financial records, legal documents spread across the surface like battle plans. The musty smell of old books mixed with the electric hum of Dorothy's computer working overtime. "Look at their original incorporation documents," she said, pointing to a 1585 survey. Their claimed boundaries include the city park, the fire station, and approximately 200 feet of Interstate 40. I studied the faded boundary lines. They can't legally claim highway property. Gets better, Robert Bellamy said, arriving with his own stack of discoveries. I traced their utility connections using my engineering contacts. They've been illegally tapping city power for the community center. 3 years of stolen electricity totaling about $30,000. The corruption was deeper than we'd imagined. Here's what I think, Robert said, his engineer's brain working overtime. This is a criminal enterprise disguised as municipal authority. But they made one mistake. What's that? The legal loophole, Robert smiled grimly. They're not actually government, which means citizens' arrest laws apply if we can prove fraud. The old house settled around us with familiar nighttime creaks, and I felt 5 generations of Blackwood determination flowing through those walls. Constance thought she was hunting easy prey. She was about to learn what happens when the prey start hunting back. Constance escalated to legal warfare. The next week, her attack dog, Reginald Pickering, a skeletal lawyer who wore $1,000 suits like medieval armor, filed an emergency lawsuit demanding $18,000 in fines plus attorney fees. The real gut punch? They'd scheduled court for just 10 days out, claiming I posed imminent threat to community welfare. The process server who delivered the lawsuit looked genuinely apologetic as he handed me papers thick enough to stop a bullet. Defendant has willfully defied lawful authority and threatens neighborhood property values through continued noncompliance. Their filing claimed they wanted my house placed under court-appointed receivership, essentially handing control to someone who'd bring the property into compliance, then sell it to recover their manufactured damages. Legal theft with a judge's blessing. But while Constance was sharpening her knives, Dorothy was building our nuclear weapon. The woman had spent 40 years mastering county records before becoming our librarian. She knew every database, every filing loophole, every bureaucratic weakness in the tri-state area. When Dorothy said she'd do some research, it was like watching a chess master plan 20 moves ahead. Ezra, she called that afternoon, barely containing her excitement, drop everything and get to the library. I've found something that'll burn their house down. At the library, Dorothy had transformed an entire table into mission control. Survey maps, financial records, legal documents spread across the surface like battle plans. The musty smell of old books mixed with the electric hum of Dorothy's computer working overtime. Look at their original incorporation documents, she said, pointing to a 1585 survey. Their claimed boundaries include the city park, the fire station, and approximately 200 feet of Interstate 40. I studied the faded boundary lines. They can't legally claim highway property. Gets better, Robert Bellamy said, arriving with his own stack of discoveries. I traced their utility connections using my engineering contacts. They've been illegally tapping city power for the community center. 3 years of stolen electricity totaling about $30,000. The corruption was deeper than we'd imagined. But Dorothy's masterpiece was for last. Financial records, she announced, sliding a manila folder across the table. The HOA collected $340,000 in assessments last year. Their filed tax returns show only $190,000 in declared revenue. Missing $150,000, Robert calculated quickly. Dorothy's eyes gleamed with righteous fury. I cross-referenced Constance's real estate purchases with HOA expenditures. Guess who got paid $145,000 for property management consulting last year? Fairweather Realty. Constance was literally paying herself with stolen HOA funds. We spent the rest of the afternoon building our case like skilled craftsmen. Robert's work mapped the illegal utility connections with engineering precision. Dorothy's work compiled financial evidence that would make federal prosecutors dance with joy. My contribution was my electrician's expertise, documenting code violations that could shut down their entire operation. But the pattern emerged. Our investigation revealed something that made my hands shake with rage. Hidden in Constance's real estate transactions was a hunting pattern that targeted recently widowed women with mathematical precision. Every victim had lost their spouse within the past 2 years. Every property was worth significantly more than the forced sale price. "She's not just stealing houses," Dorothy said quietly. "She's harvesting grief." That evening, I sat on my front porch as twilight painted Sarah's roses deep purple in the fading light. Her wind chimes caught the evening breeze, playing the melody she'd loved during our quiet moments together. I could almost feel her hand on my shoulder, whispering the words she'd said during my toughest electrical jobs. "Patience, honey. Find the right wire and the whole system lights up." But Constance wasn't finished testing my patience. The next morning brought a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Someone had dumped a pickup truck's worth of broken concrete and twisted metal on my front lawn overnight, enough construction debris to violate every city ordinance in the book. 2 hours later, a city code enforcement officer was writing me a citation. $500 per day until removed, plus administrative costs. The timing was surgical. The setup was perfect. Someone with serious municipal connections had orchestrated this frame job. As I stood there staring at the illegal dumping, my phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy. "Emergency meeting. Found the smoking gun." 20 minutes later, we were huddled in my kitchen while Dorothy dropped the bombshell that changed everything.
"I was digging through court records when I noticed something weird," she said, spreading out documents on my table. "Judge William Fairweather, the one assigned to hear your case, filed a property deed last year." "So?" "He bought Martha Gonzalez's house, the one Constance forced into foreclosure 6 months ago, paid $120,000 for a property assessed at $200,000. The room went dead silent, except for the tick of Sarah's old clock on the mantel. "Their family?" "Business partners," Dorothy corrected. "Judge Fairweather has purchased 4 properties that went through Constance's foreclosure scheme. He's not presiding over justice, he's protecting his investment portfolio." I looked out my kitchen window at the pile of debris on my lawn, then back at the evidence of a criminal conspiracy that went all the way to the bench. Constance thought she was playing chess. She had no idea we were about to flip the entire board. The 6 a.m. call, day 12. Dorothy's call came at 6 a.m., her voice shaking with excitement and something that sounded like fear. "Ezra, get over here now. Don't call anyone. Don't tell anyone where you're going. I've found something that changes everything." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Dorothy's kitchen while she paced like a caged tiger. The smell of burnt coffee filled the air. She'd clearly been up all night. "Remember I told you my grandmother kept copies of everything as county records keeper?" Dorothy said, pulling out a manila envelope that looked like it had been hidden in a safe for decades. "Well, yesterday I was cleaning out her old filing cabinet and found this." She slid a document across her kitchen table. The paper was thick, official-looking, with a raised seal that felt substantial under my fingers. "Read Section 4, she said. My hands trembled as I read the faded typing. "Property shall remain forever free and clear of any homeowners association liens, fees, or covenants, as per specific request of policyholder. This restriction runs with the deed in perpetuity and supersedes all future municipal or private organizational claims." The room went dead quiet, except for the tick of Dorothy's grandfather clock. Whispered understanding. "This document is legally binding," I whispered, hardly believing what I was seeing. "It's 30 years older than their HOA and specifically prevents exactly what they're trying to do."
"It gets better," Dorothy said, pulling out a second folder. "While I was at the courthouse yesterday, I also requested financial records on all the properties Constance has acquired through foreclosure." She spread out the evidence, a dozen property deeds like playing cards. Every single house had been purchased for 40 to 60% below market value. Every owner had been elderly. Every foreclosure had happened within 90 days of the initial violation notice. 12 houses in 2 years, Dorothy said quietly. Total market value, $2.8 million. Total purchase price, $1.6 million. She's stolen over $1 million in equity from our neighbors. But the document that made my blood run cold was at the bottom of the pile. "Purchase agreement for your property," Dorothy said, sliding it across the table. "Pre-filled, pre-signed by Constance, dated 3 months from now. Offer price, $160,000. My house was assessed at $240,000. Understanding, she was planning to steal 80 grand of my family's legacy and had already signed the paperwork. "There's something else," Dorothy said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I ran into Betty Morrison at the post office yesterday. She told me something off the record that scared her enough to make her consider early retirement." "What?" "Constance came to the courthouse last week asking about expedited foreclosure procedures. Specifically, she wanted to know the fastest way to seize property from owners who might not be mentally competent to handle their affairs." The implication hit me like a punch to the gut. If they couldn't steal my house through fake liens, they were planning to have me declared mentally unfit. I stared at the insurance document, my grandmother's signature still clear after nearly 70 years. This wasn't just about property rights anymore. This was about a criminal conspiracy that treated elderly homeowners like prey animals. "Dorothy," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest, "how many other people in our neighborhood have properties that predate the HOA?" She consulted her notes. "At least 6, maybe 8 if we count the ones with unclear incorporation dates. And how many of those owners know about historical protections, like this insurance clause? Probably none." I looked out Dorothy's kitchen window at the tree-lined street where I'd grown up, where Sarah and I had planned to grow old together, where families had built lives for generations. Constance Fairweather hadn't just declared war on me, she'd declared war on the entire concept of home. Time to show her what happens when you threaten a man's family legacy. Scene shift, day 13. The war room moved to my kitchen that same afternoon. Dorothy arrived with her research arsenal, Robert brought his engineering toolkit, and I contributed 3 decades of electrical troubleshooting skills. Sarah's old kitchen table, scarred from years of home improvement projects, became our command center for engineering Constance's complete destruction. "All right," I said, spreading out the 1955 insurance document like a battle flag. "We've got the smoking gun. Now we need to make sure they can't wiggle out of this." Robert's engineering mind. Adjusting his glasses and leaned forward. "From an engineering perspective, we need redundant systems. If one fails, 2 others kick in automatically." The smell of Dorothy's industrial-strength coffee mixed with the familiar scent of electrical tape as I opened my toolbox. Ready for war.
Building surveillance system. My first job was building a surveillance system that would make the NSA jealous. Tuesday morning work. I spent Tuesday morning installing pinhole cameras around my property using techniques learned from 30 years of hiding electrical wire in impossible spaces. Camera placement. One camera focused on the mailbox where fake violations appeared. Another covered the spot where mysterious debris kept getting dumped. A third monitored the street for Brad's diesel truck harassment. But here's the electrician's trick most people don't know. Motion-activated trail cameras designed for hunting work better than expensive security systems, cost half as much, and run on batteries that last for months. I positioned 4 of them in weatherproof boxes that looked like electrical junction housings. The hardware store clerk, Tommy, got curious about my sudden interest in surveillance gear. "Having break-in problems, Mr. Blackwood?" "Something like that," I said, loading infrared batteries into my basket. "Sometimes you need to document the problem before you can fix the wiring." Dorothy tackled the legal trap with the precision of a chess master. She discovered that challenging HOA authority requires following specific procedural steps. Miss one and they can dismiss your case on technicalities. State law mandates that HOAs provide complete financial records within 10 business days of any homeowner's written request, she explained, showing us a law book thicker than a phone directory. Failure to comply triggers automatic state audit and potential criminal investigation. And she'd already fired off certified letters demanding everything: bank statements, contractor payments, salary records, even receipts for office supplies. Each request created a legal landmine: comply and reveal their fraud, or refuse and face automatic penalties. Robert engineered the technical aspects of our trap with mathematical precision.
Turns out proving utility theft requires specific documentation that most people never think about. My buddy Jake from the electric company owes me a favor, Robert said, producing official inspection forms. He's going to do a routine maintenance check on their community center tomorrow. If they're stealing power like we think, Jake will have them disconnected and facing felony charges within 48 hours. But our masterpiece came from an unexpected phone call. Martha Rodriguez, my lawyer from 2 counties over, delivered news that made us all smile like wolves scenting blood. Her announcement: Ezra, the state attorney general's office wants to use your case as the flagship for a massive HOA fraud investigation. They're assigning 2 investigators, a forensic accountant and a prosecutor who specializes in elder abuse. What's the catch? They want you to wear a recording device to next week's HOA meeting, get Constance talking about her methods, her targets, her whole operation. Every threat, every admission goes straight to federal prosecutors. The kitchen went silent except for the tick of Sarah's old wall clock. Want me to be a spy? Think of it as quality control, Martha laughed. You're just making sure their criminal conspiracy is properly documented for warranty purposes. Robert was already grinning. It's perfect. They think you're just a stubborn old guy who won't pay fake fines. They have no idea you're building a federal case against them. Dorothy started giggling, a sound like champagne bubbles mixed with pure malice. Constance is going to confess to everything, thinking she's intimidating you into submission. We spent the afternoon planning with military precision. The recording device would be hidden in a modified hearing aid that I'd rewire for extended battery life, an old electrician's trick for boosting small electronics. Dorothy would attend as a concerned neighbor, live streaming everything to her phone for backup documentation. Robert would monitor from the parking lot with radio contact, ready to call police if things went sideways. But the beauty of our trap wasn't just the technical complexity. Here's what makes this foolproof, I said, looking at my fellow conspirators around Sarah's scarred table. Even if the recording fails, even if they somehow figure out what we're doing, we still have the insurance document, the utility theft evidence, the financial audit, and federal investigators already building their case. Dorothy nodded with satisfaction, like wiring a house with 3 different circuit breakers and a backup generator. That evening, I tested my surveillance system while sitting on the front porch. Sarah's wind chimes caught the evening breeze, playing the melody she'd loved during our quiet moments together. The smell of her memorial roses mixed with the electric ozone scent that always follows a good wiring job. Tomorrow night's HOA meeting would be Constance's last performance. Time to give her an audience she'd never forget. They figure it out. Day 18. Constance figured out we were building a case 3 days before the meeting. How I knew? I knew because my surveillance cameras caught something interesting Tuesday morning. Brad Kowalski wasn't just doing his usual harassment drive-by. He was studying my house like a burglar casing a job, taking photos of my new security cameras, even sketching rough diagrams in a notebook. The hunter had realized he was being hunted. Dorothy's call. Dorothy called that afternoon with confirmation. Her report. Ezra, Brad's been making rounds through town asking questions about us, offering money for information about our activities. What kind? What kind of questions? The kind that suggests they know we're up to something but don't know what. Mrs. Henderson said she offered her $50 to report any certified mail you receive. Tommy at the hardware store got $20 to list your recent purchases. Electricians' instincts started tingling. When people get desperate enough to pay for intelligence, they're planning something that requires surprise. That evening, I found out what. Kitchen scene. I was in my kitchen reviewing Dorothy's legal documents when my motion sensors triggered. Through the window, I watched a pickup truck park 3 houses down with its lights off, too far away for a clear view, but close enough that someone could be watching me with binoculars.
Then I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The truck's license plate had been removed. Activating systems. I activated my emergency recording system, a backup I'd wired directly into the house's main electrical panel that would capture everything and auto-upload to cloud storage. Whatever was about to happen, there'd be evidence. Brad arrived 20 minutes later. Brad's diesel truck pulled into my driveway, but this time he wasn't alone. The crew. 2 men in work clothes got out with him carrying landscaping tools that looked suspiciously like weapons in disguise. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with adrenaline as I watched through my hidden cameras. Brad was pointing at my house, gesturing toward the electrical connections, clearly briefing his companions on something specific. But here's where my electrical work paid off in ways I never expected. Instead of waiting to see what they'd do, I decided to control the situation. Cutting power. I flipped the main breaker to my house, cutting all power except for my battery-powered surveillance system. Then I called 911 from my cell phone. I need to report suspicious activity. 3 men with tools attempting to access my electrical connections without authorization. Could be planning utility theft or property damage. Dispatcher. Deputies are en route. Please stay inside and keep your phone with you. But I wasn't planning to hide. While Brad pounded on my front door, shouting about property inspections and attitude adjustments, I slipped out my back door and circled around to where the pickup truck sat with its engine running. The driver, a thin guy with nervous eyes, was too busy watching my house to notice me approach from his blind spot. I got close enough to read the vehicle identification number through the windshield and photographed the driver's face with my phone camera. Then I had an idea that would have made Sarah proud of my sneakiness. I pulled out my electrician's wire strippers and quickly disconnected the truck's battery cables. Not enough to damage anything, but enough to ensure they weren't leaving quickly when the police arrived. As I crept back toward my house, I heard Brad's voice getting increasingly agitated. "Blackwood, we know you're in there. Stop playing games and open this door." One of his companions said something I couldn't quite hear, but Brad's response was crystal clear. "I don't give a damn about legal complications. This bastard thinks he's clever. He's about to learn what happens to people who don't know their place." That's when the most beautiful sound in the world reached my ears. Police sirens getting closer by the second. The panic at the pounding on my door stopped immediately. Through my surveillance cameras, I watched Brad's companions panic, running toward their getaway vehicle, only to discover it wouldn't start. Brad, abandoned and holding a crowbar behind his back, tried to look innocent as 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled into my driveway. "Sheriff's Department, drop your weapons and show us your hands." I turned my house power back on and opened my front door to find Brad spread-eagled against my porch railing while Deputy Martinez secured the crowbar he'd been hiding. "Mr. Blackwood," the deputy said after loading all 3 men into patrol cars, "we'll need a statement, but I have to ask, how did you know to disable their vehicle?" I smiled, thinking of all the electrical troubleshooting calls where I'd had to outsmart people trying to steal copper wire. "Deputy, when someone comes to your house uninvited with tools and bad intentions, it's usually smart to make sure they stick around long enough to explain themselves to proper authorities." As I watched 3 patrol cars drive away with Brad and his friends, I realized something had fundamentally changed. They'd escalated from legal harassment to physical intimidation, which meant we'd pushed them past their comfort zone into desperation territory. And desperate people always make their biggest mistakes right before they lose everything. Constance's final gambit was coming tomorrow night. I could hardly wait. The retaliation. Day 19. The arrest of Brad and his thugs lit a fire under Constance that burned hotter than a shorted electrical panel. Within 12 hours.
Within 12 hours, she launched what can only be described as a scorched earth campaign to destroy me before tomorrow night's meeting. If legal intimidation and physical threats wouldn't work, she was going nuclear with everything she had left. The first salvo came at 6 a.m., a city code enforcement officer at my door with a citation thick enough to use as kindling. "Sir, we've received multiple complaints about your property," the officer said, looking genuinely apologetic. "Unpermitted electrical work, structural modifications without inspection, improper waste disposal, and," he consulted his clipboard with a frown, "harboring dangerous wildlife." I almost laughed. Dangerous wildlife? "Officer, the most dangerous thing on my property is Sarah's old tomcat, and he's been dead for 3 years. Says here you're keeping unauthorized chickens in violation of City Ordinance 14.7. I looked at my backyard, then back at him. "I don't own chickens, never have." "Well, someone filed sworn statements with photographic evidence. Each violation carries a $500 daily fine until corrected." The smell of fresh morning dew on my roses mixed with the bitter taste of manufactured injustice. Someone with serious municipal connections was pulling strings to bury me in fake citations. But Constance's masterpiece arrived 2 hours later. A process server handed me documents declaring me mentally incompetent to manage property affairs and requesting immediate court-appointed guardianship. The petition, filed by concerned neighbors, claimed I'd been exhibiting paranoid delusions about neighborhood organizations and making threats against local officials. They were trying to have me declared crazy so they could steal my house legally. I called Dorothy immediately. "They're going for the nuclear option, guardianship petition." "I know," she said grimly. "I got one too. So did Robert. They're claiming we're a conspiracy of delusional elderly residents requiring protective oversight." The audacity was breathtaking. File fake violations, then claim our efforts to fight back proved we were mentally unfit to manage our own affairs. But while Constance was busy painting us as delusional, Dorothy was busy destroying her entire operation from the inside. Ezra, Dorothy said, her voice crackling with excitement. "Remember my contact at the State Attorney General's office? They just executed search warrants on the HOA office, Constance's real estate company, and Brad's landscaping business."
This morning, 20 minutes ago, federal agents seized all financial records, computer files, and correspondence. They also froze the HOA bank accounts pending fraud investigation. I sat down hard in Sarah's old kitchen chair. "What does it mean? What does that mean for tomorrow night's meeting?" Dorothy's satisfaction. "It means Constance doesn't know her entire operation is already dead. She's going to walk into that meeting thinking she still has power, not realizing federal prosecutors are building a RICO case against her." But Dorothy had saved the best news for last. The insurance investigator called this morning. Turns out our little property dispute triggered a much bigger investigation. They've connected Constance to insurance fraud schemes in 4 states, totaling over $2 million. She's not just facing HOA violations, she's looking at federal racketeering charges. The scope of Constance's criminal empire was staggering. What started as a property dispute had uncovered a multi-state fraud operation that treated elderly homeowners like ATM machines. That afternoon brought the final piece of her desperation puzzle. Martha Gonzalez called, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "Ezra, someone broke into my apartment last night, tore the place apart looking for something." "Did they take anything?" "That's the strange part. They ignored my jewelry, my cash, even my late husband of coin collection, but they searched through all my papers like they were looking for specific documents." The pattern was clear. Constance was trying to recover evidence of her crimes before tomorrow night's showdown. Her assumption, she probably figured if she could find and destroy the original insurance policies and property documents, she could still salvage her scheme. But what she didn't know was that Dorothy had already distributed copies to the FBI, the State Attorney General, the Insurance Commission, and 3 different lawyers in 2 states. The evidence was bulletproof and backed up in more places than Fort Knox gold. As evening fell, I sat on my front porch watching the sunset paint Sarah's memorial roses deep crimson in the dying light. Her wind chimes played their familiar melody in the breeze, and for the first time in months, I felt something that had been missing: peace. Tomorrow night, Constance would walk into that community meeting expecting to deliver the final blow to a stubborn old man who wouldn't pay his fake fines. Instead, she'd be walking into a federal trap with cameras rolling, prosecutors watching, and 3 elderly victims who'd spent weeks documenting every detail of her criminal enterprise. The smell of evening jasmine mixed with the electric ozone scent of an approaching thunderstorm. Change was coming to our little neighborhood, and Constance Fairweather was about to find out what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness.